named Conger.
Yeah.
Who is used as a trope to showcase this Philip K. Dick story. Speaking about that, because I had read the story, so I already knew what you were doing. I believe that you mentioned it to me in a prior interaction. But the use of that and then how it turns to show his deceit is a very effective tool. I think this is a good example of, even though this is probably not as great a book as Norwegian, that you can pack more information in this, and that there's writing in this that is every bit as good or better than anything in Norwegian.
Well, it's interesting because this fellow, this I think he's from Britain, had recently wanted to see some of my plays, and then he wanted to read one of my big books, so I gave him the Vincetti Brothers first. And in rereading the Vincetti Brothers, I have to say, I was surprised at how much and detailed my descriptions of some of the people and the areas were. And it shows how just in 5 or 6 years, even though I had taken up the mantle of what do I call my term? I forget my own term for total immersion. Jessica says total immersion. even though I had taken up total immersion, I still was. The Vincetti Brothers is still probably now closer to Tumbleweeds in terms of its writing than it is to the stuff now. So there is a big break in a sense, even between Vincetti Brothers to Norwegian. But one of the things that's interesting is I allied a lot more. When I read the Vincetti Brothers, and even when I've read some portions of the Norwegian, I still was filling in gaps. Here, I'm making these books much more interactive in that you have to assume certain things. When, for example, well, just to use the Conger thing, I wanted to do a story where a character. I didn't want to do the sci-fi trope of traveling back in time. So in my universe, it's been scientifically proven at the moment that one cannot travel back in time. So time travel is out, and this is one of the big tropes there. So I said, but wouldn't it be interesting if I encountered a character from a public domain work of science fiction that was a time traveler, or thought he was a time traveler? So I said, let me look through Project Gutenberg and find a time travel story with a character. Now, I didn't expect, I wasn't going to go back as far as using, say, H.G. Wells's time traveler from the Time Machine. That would have been too obvious. And I think it was the third or maybe the fourth story that I looked in Project Gutenberg. I bookmarked it, and I saw Philip K. Dick, and there's this story called The Skull with this character called Omar Conger, who basically goes back in time. It's a society quite similar to the Goo, too, which provides another instance of parallelism, where this society that runs the politics of the era is battling this thing called the First Church. So it's the battle of political will versus religious theocracy, and the people who run the political end send this killer and hunter, this basically the guy who's an assassin, back in time 200 some years to Colorado in the 1950s to kill off the character who becomes known as the founder of the religious First Church. And just by reading the story and knowing the whole trope, you just know that it's going to turn out that Conger is the founder, and that by going back in time and by leapfrogging himself, he sets himself up that when the main story takes place in the past, he has already been seen before. Has been killed. He's been killed in the future. He comes back beforehand, and people are startled that when he comes back the second time, it's 6 months after he's been killed in his own timeline's future. So anyway, it's this very trite, very 1940s, 50s sci-fi travel kind of story, and it's written by Philip K. Dick, who I've mentioned before, I think is one of the most overrated writers. Even in some of his most acclaimed stories, he has some interesting ideas. He has zero ability at characterization. His dialogue is stilted and horrid. There's just nothing. He's an idea man. And I said, this is perfect. It apparently appeared in a magazine and wasn't renewed. And I trust Project Gutenberg because you can check and you can get the certificates and you can see that they looked it up, and you can look it up in the Library of Congress. There's no evidence that this story by Philip K. Dick called The Skull was ever renewed for copyright. So like It's a Wonderful Life, it fell into the public domain. I think it was published in 1957 or 59. In the mid-'80s, it fell into the public domain.